While you're muted, please go ahead and use the chat feature if you have questions or other comments. We will, as I said, I'll turn it over to Barbara for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Chris. While we wait, we probably have another 20 people, I think, who might join us. And so while we wait for them to get hooked up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about IAP2. Many of you know the organization, but this will be a brief introduction. The Colorado chapter is part of IAP2 USA, and IAP2 USA is part of a federation of affiliates from all over the world. And so this is just kind of a graphic showing you where IAP2 reaches out to. The USA has a vision and mission, and basically the goal is to lead, advance, and advocate for best practices in public participation. There's also an organization.
Sorry,
we're muted.
I should quickly want to check real quick. We got one complaint about people not hearing us. Were you able to hear the introduction? Could anybody confirm that?
I'm muted.
I could hear the presentation, but I hear an echo.
But you hear an echo.
Okay. Okay, so I think we should just keep going though.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so moving right along, there's a number of chapters. You can see Colorado in blue in the middle, and the chapters coordinate together and share best practices. And some of the things, if you're not an IAP2 member, that you might want to know about is that we have conferences. We have two this year. One is a skills symposium in Minneapolis, and the second is in Portland, where actually the first IAP2 conference was, and that's in the fall. We have three kind of cornerstone training programs that are really fantastic. The planning and techniques courses, which I got to help prepare, were updated recently, and one of the things our chapter is thinking of doing this year is hosting those courses. And we also hosted Emotion, Outrage, and Public Participation a couple years ago. Networking is huge with IAP2. I would not have met my co-presenters here, and I really value the people that I've met through this organization. We also have tools that really help people communicate about public participation, in particular the spectrum that connects people's kind of the objective of what you're trying to achieve with how you go about doing that is something that a lot of members really value when they're communicating with their organizations. And we have core values awards, and here in Colorado we're proud to have some connections to the previous awards. Longmont, the crew that's from Longmont, won the Project of the Year award in 2006. And if John Poynton or anybody from St. Vrain Schools is on the line, they just won it last year. So we have a great track record, and we hope to keep that going. As a chapter, some of the recent activities we've been doing, we have a newsletter, we've had a session on telephone town halls, on online tools. We did this fun answer hunt at the conference recently. We hosted training. We did a drink and draw on graphic recording. And as Lisa says, we also do meet and eats, informal gatherings. And then Sandy and I did a presentation to the Colorado Municipal League on appreciative inquiry. So we've done a number of things, and we're coming to 2015, and we'd love to hear your ideas for what you'd like to see this year. As I said, we're looking at the training. We're also looking at, we're presenting to Colorado Municipal League. And if you want to share ideas during our session, I'm hearing some voices. Please feel free to chat your ideas for what you'd like to see this year. But I am going to let you just chat those, and then I'll check in with you to share your ideas verbally as we wrap up this. So the last thing I'd like to do is just tell you what to expect today, and that's what we're going to do, kind of going through the agenda. We have 3 exciting projects to present to you. Chris Holler from Urban Interactive Studios is going to talk about games and simulations all the way from the Denver Zoo to the state of Georgia. And there'll be time after his presentations for Q&A, but you can always just chat your questions as we go along. And then Lisa Carlson and Maureen Walsburn from Engage Public will talk about the Colorado Citizens Initiative Review. And again, you'll have time for questions, and then I'll do a quick wrap up. So that's our plan. And at this point, I'm going to turn the speaker over to Chris, who will jump in on games and simulations.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And let me just take this off and pull up my presentation real quick. Basically, we are obviously here to look at rethinking how we're sort of traditional approaches was sort of our title, and it was the idea to sort of look at how new communication strategies can make public involvement more effective. And so with that, I want to just show a couple of examples that we've recently been working on, mostly under the umbrella of, or specifically in the cases that I'm going to highlight, to deal with sort of how do we rethink how the outcomes of a lot of the work that we do in planning or transportation planning or environmental planning or whatever that may be, how that can be turned from these long, static sort of documents that nobody really reads into something that is more fun to explore, that is easy to engage with, that is easy to respond to and provide feedback on, which again, sort of in the current approach of doing that, oftentimes gets lost and is somewhat tedious. And so with that, you know, we have some ideas and kind of have explored over the last couple of years several different strategies, from, you know, visualizing them, making them interactive, using this new online medium, both to get the information across as well as to provide feedback. And I want to kind of highlight some examples and then sort of extract some lessons from that, you know, hopefully it might be valuable to use in your everyday work. So the first one is sort of this idea, well, we come through a planning process, we come up with a draft plan, and we want to involve the public in sort of reviewing this. So this is a later stage kind of engagement process, rather than sort of early on where we sort of ask broad questions and sort of bold questions in a broader sort of visioning type setting. Oftentimes later on in a project we have, you know, defined a set of, you know, outcomes or alternatives that we want to present. And what we find is that oftentimes that happens in, you know, long static PDF documents, a couple of 100 pages long, that are really hard to navigate and usually sort of turn people off. Nobody really looks at them in depth. Oftentimes we hear that even from decision makers. I was like, yeah, we read the executive summary, but we don't read the full report. So the question is, and then we oftentimes, you know, use that PDF and tell people to go to maybe a SurveyMonkey for a software questionnaire or survey somewhere, which obviously, you know, leads to people to less informed kind of feedback, because oftentimes, yeah, you know, people don't read the report and provide sort of feedback without sort of knowing the details that we hope they would know when going into that. And so, you know, just one recent example that is fun, which is sort of why I wanted to kind of jump into this, is we just launched this yesterday. It's the Denver Zoo, you know, it's going through a master planning process. So they're looking at how are we going to, you know, what are the different exhibits, what are the different ideas we want to implement in the next 20 years. And so they wanted to get this across in a very playful manner, and then, you know, drive people down to learn more where they're interested, and, you know, provide feedback and guidance to them along the way. And so the interesting thing here is typically when we look at this as an online engagement kind of provider or consultant, we find that that people only come with a limited amount of time. It's not like we have them for, you know, a half hour or a couple of hours like we might have in a workshop, but rather we have them, you know, maybe with just 10, 15 minutes of their time. And so we want to make sure we provide the most important information in, you know, bite-sized 1-2 paragraph kind of sizes. We make it very visual. We allow people to kind of dive deeper in where they feel like they want to learn more and kind of look at some of those background information or background areas, for example, and look at some of the maps and other things that go into the planning. And then they, obviously can jump back and take these little excursions and go back and kind of look at some of the other principles and strategies that go into planning a zoo, and then jump into the sort of public engagement piece where, in this case, there's some fun prizes to win, which is always exciting, especially with the zoo, where you get free admission tickets and memberships and things like that. And as you can tell, sort of we have a broader kind of set of questions to jump in and get started with. So we ask them to rank and prioritize their biggest concerns. So somebody in the neighborhood might say, I'm really concerned about parking in the neighborhood. Other people might say, the educational opportunities are much more important. Collect a little bit of feedback or background information. And I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to skip ahead. And so with this, we've engaged the people that have 5 or 10 minutes of their time. And so if you have more time and more interest, you can at this point sort of jump deeper in. And so we have the different exhibits that they're planning on, a large map, and you can kind of explore them there, or, in some tiles, and you can kind of zoom around and go into saying, actually, I'm really interested in this sort of new watering hole idea. Or I think pick a different one that might be better to kind of look at. There was I'm a neighbor, the zoo community interface is something that I really care deeply about. And so you jump in, you kind of see where you're at. You get some, again, some background information here, like the different things we're doing around the zoo, learn a little bit more, and then again, sort of jump into some detailed feedback about this specific area where we ask you to rate sort of different options and how much you agree and overlap with them. And so again, the idea here is that we guide people after submitting. You actually come back to the main page, and so you can pick your own path through the materials. And we don't have to, you don't have to go through this in a linear fashion. You can provide, go as deep as you like. And you can dive even deeper into some of the actual document after all. If you're really interested and you belong to maybe the 10% of people that have very specific questions and want to know it all. But so again, we have a different path that works for different audiences and depending on how much time you have. So, and visualizing this, I want to just sort of add one more quick example. Is this sort of visual, very rich, infographic, rich kind of style is something that we find works well with other sort of documents, like this, what they call the regional playbook. And I just wanted to highlight this because I think there's all kinds of different ideas on how to break down some of the longer content into, little infographics, zoomable maps, maybe with a before and after kind of sort of comparison, or maybe even a quiz, instead of just putting the facts out, saying why don't you go ahead and explore and kind of figure out what the right answer to this is. And so learning by trying, and again with embedded feedback right in there. So after this quick example, I want to just sort of summarize the different what we sort of we've learned in this work, what works. So one is this sort of free navigation, interest-based navigation. We offer you choices, and likely you won't be interested in the 200 pages, but we want to give you an option to choose and to kind of go into your topic that you're most interested in first, and then provide other options from there to continue your journey through this content. Another key element of this is embedding feedback directly within, so we can, educate and combine education and feedback instead of, having those in separate places. Another piece that we find is very interesting, sort of this visual discovery, again, sort of the infographic style graphics that make you, get it or understand certain concepts at a glance without having to read much. We like these sort of before and after maps that you've seen probably in other examples that make it very effective to compare different things when you look at maps instead of having to click on different layers and turn other layers off. The piece we find interesting is that the PDF and print is such a, like a terrible medium, because all of these very rich things that go into and are created throughout the planning process, like the interactive maps, the videos, the visualizations, all of that ultimately gets lost if you put it into a static format. And so having that opportunity to embed videos, to embed maps is really key. And then, again, making it playful, making it providing options where people can, where these game elements come in and they can discover instead of having to read to learn. Just sort of trying different ways of learning, I think, is very effective. And last, obviously, we need to kind of make sure that all this works on touch devices. And I think there's a whole sort of another set of interaction that kind of goes into that we can, make this fun, and you can take the tablet and use it at home, or you hand out some tablets in a meeting and people can kind of explore it there. The other, so that was one sort of case study. The other part that I want to quickly jump into, I'm just going to do it afterwards. So how do we get complex information across? So the idea of well, maybe we're facing a budgeting process. It's very complicated. Obviously, again, you could outline all this in PDF or a long document, send people to surveys, sort of the business as usual case. But we're thinking there's other ways of doing that might be more effective. So we did this project earlier or end of last year for the Georgia Department of Transportation, and they were facing this question how can we include people in helping us allocate funds for the next 25 years and set priorities. And so we provided, again, some background information. People could read a little bit about those different topic areas. And then after sort of selecting where you live and providing some demographics, we jumped into it's just going to take a second. I should have preloaded that. We jump into sort of a user interface that allows people to actually allocate those funds. And the interesting thing we find is sort of, again, putting people in sort of a problem-solving mindset when tackling this. So as you can tell, as I'm allocating funds, you see, the overall budget grow, and we have a $44 billion limit in here. And then you see different sort of performance metrics grow. And the interesting part here is sort of this deliberative process. And, again, this is not true deliberation with other people, but it's sort of this on a personal level, going through this exercise of kind of figuring out, okay, I can't invest in everything. And, if I do this, I can't, maybe I'm really thinking that pedestrian and bicycle funding should be a priority. And I realized, okay, I can't do it all. I have to, cut back on some of the other things in order to be able to invest in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. And so having that sort of putting people from a wishful thinking mindset into a problem-solving mindset and giving them some challenges that are interesting to solve, that inspire them, or that get the creative juices flowing, is really something that I think is very effective online. And I think that a couple of lessons, again, sort of from this, I think really the more we can offer this as a challenge and wrap sort of the engagement and the feedback we want into a challenge and stimulate sort of the problem-solving part of the mind, the better. Again, sort of trial and trade-offs is sort of a key piece. Sort of the idea is okay, I can go back and change these things and allocate, and realize that all these things have different trade-offs and there's no perfect solution. But if we play with this, I can come up with something that works. Is really sort of different than an open-ended sort of question or survey. Using preference games, sort of the idea is if we have alternatives, why not flip this on its head? Instead of giving people the task of reading through all of them, maybe we can boil it down to some key questions that separate them, and then say, okay, the rural scenario or the urban infill scenario is what you're leaning towards. Go take a look at those. We've seen this work with leaderboards and prizes. I mentioned that earlier. There's some shortfalls to that too, because you can incentivize them the wrong way, and you get a lot of, yay, this is awesome comments that are not that helpful. But there's I think it's a successful tool. And another sort of aspect of this is sort of playing with curiosity. So oftentimes we promise early on that you'll see how you compare to others, and sort of that personal curiosity is okay, I want to see how I compare, how everybody else thinks in my region, is sort of, again, another sort of incentive for them to provide feedback. Before I stop, I want to sort of highlight, it's interesting because in web development and sort of that realm, there's a lot of sort of strategies on how to do this, but in print design, and oftentimes in sort of our world, in planning and public engagement, there's no recommendations or best practices. And so it's one of my favorite books about web usability is by this guy Steve Brook, and it's called "Don't Make Me Think." And if there's one way to summarize this, is truly how can we design this? How can we design our documents, the information that we want to get across in a way that people don't have to think? How can we make this so it's intuitive to understand? That's sort of what Apple is about, and how they, how their devices are so beloved by so many people is because, you don't have to read the instruction. It just, works most of the time. And so user experience design is sort of another sort of related field to that. It's like, how can we, make this an experience? And I think this is this chart, without wanting to go into too much detail, sort of how can we, in the sort of pyramid of needs, in a sense of user interaction design, how can we go from the functional, okay, this works, it works to post a PDF and send people to a survey, but how can we flip this and change that to something that goes on the towards the higher end of the pyramid, towards something that is not only convenient, but, is fun to explore, and in a sense meaningful, rather than sort of having to go through the nuisance of reading and learning in the traditional format. So with that, I want to just maybe open it up for 2-3 questions, quick questions, and then we can go into the second part and have Lisa and Maureen tell us more about their case study. Since that, I have to confess that the unmuting and muting everybody is not the greatest feature, or at least I don't fully understand how to use it, as it turned out earlier. I'm going to say it's probably best if you want to just jot down your question in the chat box real quick, and I'll read it out loud and answer it. And if not, I think I don't see any questions at the moment, so go ahead. First one is coming in. How do you reach people who don't have access to technology? Good question. I think there are, so it's interesting. So I've been in this field for, the last 12, 13 years. And when we first started doing this, everybody was looking at us like, what, you're using the web and I have to go into an online forum, and, who's going to show up for that? And I think that story has changed a little bit. Most of the people we work with realize that, the traditional way is not the only way of doing it. There's a larger part of our audience now who expects to be able to do or participate online and learn about these things online, just because that's, how they bank, that's how they shop. That's sort of part of everybody's daily life. And, that extends now to their mobile phone, which is for a lot of people the primary access to the internet. And so I think the mix of that has changed, where we need to do sort of both. And I think, but I also see sort of the shortfall of like, there being certain audiences that we don't reach either way. And so I think that hasn't really changed. We have to go to them. And so what we find effective, if we, obviously, if we're in the mix, we provide sort of digital engagement tools. And so we, for example, rent out tablets, and we'll have those in a library and in other places. And, or, we have an ambassador program, and students go and go to the grocery store, or the farmer's market, or to, certain community centers and engage people there. And so I think it's an interesting way to expand that. But again, like I don't think, technology is obviously not the answer to all, and it, excludes certain parts of your community. And yeah, so that's sort of the answer that I would have for this. A follow-up question to that was, how do you segment your community? And that's a good question. So I think in terms of the different audience that we reach in different ways, it's sort of an ongoing process that includes sort of, again, sort of an evaluation early on, kind of looking at who do we think we reach with different outreach channels, and who are the people that we don't. And I don't think there's a one set way of doing this. I think it's different in every community. We work in communities that are very rural and have less access to the web, and more traditional means of engagement are probably better suited for them. And there's high-tech communities that we work with where most of the people are connected, and so the mix looks different there. Last question, and I think at that point we're going to turn it over and we can do more questions afterwards. Last question is, have you used text message-based surveys on past projects? Any lessons learned for text messaging? Good question. It's an add-on that we've used a few times, and I've seen some of the projects, larger projects we worked on, had Textism, which you might be familiar with as an engagement tool, as part of the mix. And it's, mixed results. I think the challenge, as always with any of these things, is how do you do the outreach, like the outreach materials, how can you reach, into mailing lists and to market through social media and using other means to kind of reach people to participate. And in those projects, I have to say, text messaging wasn't a big part of it. And, I don't know exactly if that was because the partners we had at that point didn't market it right, or whether they had other issues. I think there's a quick, I kind of personally feel there's often a jump to the conclusion that, well, 96% of all Americans can text message because they have a cell phone and text messaging is part of their plan. But, that doesn't mean that people actually use text messaging for, as a means to get engaged or for anything else than to text their kids. And, for that matter, even, the teenagers that we might think we might get that way might not be interested in participating that way. If, the challenge or the questions we present aren't relevant to them, or other things are not aligned. So I think, I think mixed messages, or mixed results, I would say. I think there's some promise to it, no doubt, but I'm not sure that it holds sort of some of the promises that often go with it. There's one more question, but I think we'll come back to this later just to make sure we're going to stay on time. Let me turn this over real quick. I'm going to exit the slideshow here. And I'm going to bring up our second presentation about this Colorado Citizens Initiative Review. 1 second. All right.
As Chris said, actually at the end, if there's more questions, because we're giving you a whole lot and not allowing too much discussion, but we'd be happy to stay around and talk a little bit further. Also, I think Chris said he'd make available his email, and I think that's up as well. If you want to talk offline, that would be great too. I'm Lisa Carlson with Engage Public, and we too have used technology for public engagement, but the example I'm going to talk about today is a highly face-to-face, very intensive, not the 10-minute description, called the Colorado Citizens Initiative Review, which was an experiment in deliberative democracy. The purpose really was to give voters unbiased and factual information using a unique deliberative process that was we hoped was based on hard evidence as well as analysis of the participants themselves. To describe our roles, because I think it's very important, I was the facilitator, as you can see there with the arrow pointing, along with Civic Canopy with Bill Fulton. We co-facilitated what was a 3.5-day process. And Maureen?
And I'm not pictured in this photo, but my name is Maureen Waldhorn, and I'm a program manager here at Engage Public. And I was involved and in charge of a lot of the behind-the-scenes work during the Citizens Initiative Review, so a lot of the logistics management and the process implementation.
I might say that the roles were really important because this was a political initiative and really wanted to make sure that the facilitation stayed very neutral and was separated from a lot of the work with the experts and the proponents for and against the campaigns. Also, I wanted the slides have all of the actual participants that were utilized during the process. So you'll see more of those. So what's the need for the Citizens Initiative Review process? Oops, did it go off? Okay. The ballot initiatives are an important part of the democratic process in the Western states, as I think most of you are more than familiar with in the communities looking at the list of folks we have on the line. They're often complex and have major implications. Survey research indicates that a large majority of voters often find these very confusing and hard to understand and really don't know where to turn to for accurate and unbiased information and tend not to trust, honestly, some of the commercials or information that they may hear. So moving forward, how it all started, it was actually championed in Oregon by Healthy Democracy and is based on the citizens jury model of public deliberation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As it's part of the IAP2 training, and if you want to know more about it, that's a good place to go. But in Oregon, it was actually formalized in a House bill and brought into Oregon statute. And the official pilot ran in 2010 in Oregon. That CIR actually in 2000, the Oregon CIR won the 2013 IAP2 award for North America, and then went on to win the national project, and which isn't actually very surprising because the CIR is very consistent with the IAP2 core values and the citizens jury model, specifically as a best practice technique and taught by IAP2's training for involving the public. And as Barb mentioned, that training will be offered. We hope that training will be offered if there's interest from all of you in Colorado. So please weigh in on that. So in 2014, Engage Public, in partnership with Healthy Democracy, launched a pilot of the CIR in Colorado. Maureen?
So now I'm sure you're all wondering, if you don't know, what the Citizens Initiative Review is and what it looks like. Let me preface this by saying that in Colorado, as in Oregon, an advisory board oversees the process. So here in Colorado, we gathered a bipartisan advisory board that really represented the diversity of the state, so people from all over Colorado who represented different populations. And this advisory board was tasked with three things. First, they were tasked with making sure the process was fair and unbiased, so that us as the staff and the implementers of the CIR were fair and not pushing the panelists to think one way or another about the measure. Although we think we're being very fair and unbiased, it's just another oversight to make sure the process is very fair to the panelists. They were also tasked with selecting the measure. And for the Colorado CIR pilot, the advisory board selected Proposition 105, which is the GMO labeling initiative. And finally, the advisory board is tasked with helping select the panelists. They don't handpick them by name, but through a very extensive process, they help select the panelists to make sure that they represent the electorate of the state. So let me walk you through this infographic real quick. I'm sure you all can read it. It gives you a high overview of the process. But we mail out 5,000 mailers to random registered voters in Colorado, and we give them a questionnaire if they're interested in the process, obviously some background of what they're getting into, and it's upon them if they're interested in mailing it back. On those people who mail it back, we select 20 panelists that represent the demographic diversity of the voting population of Colorado. So these panelists came from all over the state, had all different types of backgrounds, experience voting, education levels, and so on. The panelists come together for 3.5 days, and they hear from policy experts, advocates, so those are people who are involved in the measure pro and con, and they're basically tasked with coming up with something called a citizen statement. And the core of this citizen statement is giving voters in Colorado the most important information on this measure. It's not about swaying voters one way or another, but if someone was to go and vote on Proposition 105 and they had no idea what it was about, what are the most important pieces of information for the voters to have?
I might point out a couple things. Actually, one thing that we didn't mention that some of you may know is that, did you say the initiative that we did was Proposition 105 for the GMOs that was voted on last November? What was interesting about this process in terms of the facilitation of it is Healthy Democracy has produced a very specific process, not unlike the jury system in our courts, so that the efficacy is maintained. That is that the panelists, as they're called, the 20 people, have equal access to the information at the same time. And so they have what ends up being like a 100-page manual on facilitating this 3.5 days, and it's very specific. And it's also being evaluated daily, and it's also being evaluated nationally, where they're asking, are the facilitators neutral? But they're also asking process questions like, do you feel like you can speak up? Is your opinion being valued by your peers? And what that set up is just a wonderful, along with ground rules and very specific things, is people took very seriously their jobs about trying to analyze things for the Colorado citizens. So it was really fascinating to watch, and people will talk a little bit more about it later. We hope that you have been on the line the whole time because we just got a funny message. But at any rate, they produce a one-page document that we put out by social media as well as by hard copy, indicating the key findings of the panelists. So we have the 10 key findings, but then there's also the 5 key findings for, and the 5 key findings against that they felt that was important for the general Colorado population to know. Also of interest really is that while there's general agreement on the findings, that it does not necessarily predict that there's agreement on the initiative itself. While it wasn't a huge priority, in the last hour of the last day, the panelists then voted how they would vote on this particular initiative. In this case, you can see that in the GMO, 11 of the 20 panelists took the position of supporting the measure and 9 opposing it. But honestly, I couldn't have told you who was going to do what, and many people reported that they changed their minds. Okay. Yeah.
And let me just add really quick that in Oregon, because this process is in statute, every time they do a citizens initiative review, that citizen statement is printed in their voter's guide. Since this was a pilot here in Colorado, the citizen statement for Proposition 105 was not printed in the Blue Book. So like Lisa said, it was disseminated through the website, social media, news, and it was just an interesting comparison in learning about where people get their information when voting. And a lot of people do turn to the voter's guide, but a lot of people also turn to different sources.
So some of our observations and implications perhaps of this process is, first of all, what I already said already is just both anecdotally as well as the evaluation, as people really enjoyed and committed to the process, and I realize there's only 20, but they actually, many of them want to do it again, which statistically probably won't happen given the random selection. But this quote here is very consistent of what people said, and they really enjoyed the democratic process or felt a part of it. There is a possibility of continuing the CIR in Colorado, but as Maureen indicated, it's not in statute like it is in Oregon. Having said that, neither one of them are funded, so the funds always have to be raised. So it's going to have to happen from a private party. As indicated before, interestingly enough, it's a team of researchers from CSU and some others that are evaluating the effectiveness of the process. And they're evaluating it nationally, so the total complete results aren't out yet, but should be soon. The other thing, though, is that while this particular initiative the CIR has been taking on things that are on the ballot initiative, it doesn't necessarily, the citizens jury model, and Barbara might speak to this if you have more questions, because I know she's talked about this a lot, but how to apply the citizens jury model to smaller public entities and municipalities. And this was done in
Maricopa County in Arizona, which I think is the county in Phoenix, and also in Oregon when they ran a pilot, they ran one in Jackson County. So it has been implemented on a more local level and found to be quite successful.
but it could possibly also be used for things that voters wouldn't necessarily vote on, whether it be planning initiatives, fracking, a number of other things that might be more complex things that people can't quite get their heads wrapped around, that it might give some more information for folks. This was actually the group of 20 who clearly bonded over the 3.5 days, and you can see the diversity of everyone there. I think in terms of age, it was like 19 to 70 something, and they were just really a wonderful, committed group of people. If you want more information, go to circolorado.org. That's actually on the Healthy Democracy site, so you can see all of the other states as well, Arizona, Oregon, and Colorado. And you can also contact us with more questions if you have any. So I'm turning to our tech guy here.
So if you want to use the chat feature again to type any questions, I think that'd be great.
There's actually 2 questions, and were those from you?
We can come back to them.
Okay.
How did you determine this?
So the question is, how did you determine the 20 people? Maureen?
Yeah, I'll take this. And sorry if the way I explain it isn't clear. I have explained this a couple of times to people, and I just never do a great job of explaining it. So like I said, mailers are sent out to 5,000 random voters. And that it's just the 5,000 off the top of the list that are randomized. And so if you got one in the mail, you'd open this envelope up and have a sheet of paper explaining what the CIR is and how it's coming to Colorado, and a questionnaire if you would be interested in participating, and you could commit to the 3.5 days. And it's upon you if you'd like to mail it back. So obviously a lot of people did not. It probably just went in their trash. And so for the people who mail them back, there's a couple different demographic areas of how we define people. If you are registered Democrat, Republican, Independent, a man, a woman, geography, age, your voting history. So each of those demographic categories was coded. So let's take.
And about how many did we get back?
I think over 100. They found that the return mailing increases when, if it's something, a initiative of the state. So if it's a state seal on it, obviously it looks a little more official and legitimate, although this was legitimate. You get a random mailer at home, you don't know what it is. It takes kind of a leap of faith just to fill it out and send it in. So from everyone we get back, we code them by demographics. So we give them a number. So let's say I'm number 1. And because I'm a woman, we'll say, if you're a woman, you're given a star, and if you're a man, you're given, I don't know, a moon. I'm just making these up. So we would say, and we find out through kind of some return polling information, kind of what the demographic makeup of the electorate of Colorado is. So let's say it's 60% women, or let's just say it's 50% women, 50% men. So that means we need 10 women and 10 men. So we would go through and say, and it got kind of tricky with finding people who matched each of these demographics to fill out accurately this chart of percentages. So let's say we need someone who is a man. Well, we need to say, find someone who's a moon who's also something else. So all of these things were coded, and that's how the advisory group helped pick them out. And you code the demographic just to add another layer of making sure it's unbiased. Because if you're saying we need a man who's a Democrat who lives in Denver, it gets too specific, and it also, although everyone tries to be unbiased, your own, those things just kind of creep back in. So everyone's coded. And I don't know if I did a good job of explaining that, and I would be more than happy to talk to someone at length about how this works, but that's how they're selected.
I might add, we also selected a couple alternates so if people didn't show up, and in fact that was the case, but we had an alternate there who was so vested in the process that she said she didn't know she was an alternate, and she said she wasn't going to leave unless, because she was so excited about this. So the people that actually sent an application in were already clearly vested in this process, which was nice.
The next question is, sorry, I just
That's all right. Good.
jumped right in. So someone said, this is a great project, thanks. Do you have any ideas on how it could be done more often and at lower cost?
You know, yes and no. This particular one was very staff intensive in that I think there was 4 Healthy Democracy staff and 4 Engaged Public staff that worked on it for a long time, which clearly is pretty expensive. What Healthy Democracy is trying to do with their CIR is to really, with this manual and with some steps, is to streamline it, and by replicating it over and over, I think make it more affordable for folks. But yeah, the funding of it is an issue, and it really was pretty intensive. So I understand that. Any other questions?
Oh, and I was looking back up and it said, how did you determine the 20 people as the number? So I guess the question maybe was, why is it 20 people? I think Healthy Democracy maybe ran one of their pilots with more people. A lot of it just comes down to cost because the participants, or the panelists, I should say, are given a stipend. So obviously the more people you have, the more stipend money you have to plan for and fundraise for, the more expensive you have to house them, paying for their mileage. So I think that was kind of a barrier of having more people. I just think they also found that 20 people was a good, manageable number of bringing a diversity of voices and perspectives, but also making sure that every person who was there had a valuable role. And obviously, as you all know, that as the numbers grow, the more easy it is for people to kind of not participate as much. So Lisa, maybe you can speak to that more as the facilitator.
Yeah, they started off, I think, with 30, 35 people. And as they streamline the process, they're trying different things and really utilizing the evaluation to tweak the process so that it can be replicated more often very successfully.
And I'd also add to the last question that was just asked about costs and lowering costs. You know, if you do this on a more local level, you know, one of the bigger costs we had here was we had a lot of people coming from all over Colorado, which is great because they represented the diversity of the state, but also you have housing costs. So when you do it on a local level, you can decrease that. Also, the CIR was originally a 5-day process, so you had to pay people for all of those days, and it's been cut down to a 3.5-day process, which we will tell you that's a lot of stuff to do in 3.5 days, but that also kind of decreases the cost. So there's some different strategies depending on the scale of the CIR of how you can decrease the cost a little bit.
The folks in Phoenix that ran this were doing the municipal, so it was a lot less expensive in terms of what they're doing, and they actually also were university based, so it was slightly different, but it would be worthwhile looking into what they did too on the website. Any other questions for us?
And someone asked if they could get a copy of the presentations with the contact info, and I'm sure you can.
Sure. Yeah, we're planning on sending a follow-up email that 1 will have the recording, 2 maybe some follow-up questions from our end, and then also we can send the slides, some PDFs with the slides as part of that too.
Any other questions as well for Chris? I know that there might have been a couple up there that we didn't answer. Is there another stage where everyone gets input? Is that yours? There's a question, is there another stage once everyone gives input? How do you follow up on the results or dive deeper?
Right, so typically a lot of the projects we do are sort of ongoing where we start, like support a process, a planning process or something like that over the course of a year or 2. And so we have an engagement plans, what we call engagement plans is our platform to run and host sort of most of the project information and do public outreach. And then in different phases, wherever, you know, it's feasible and, you know, where public feedback is needed, we sort of design a specific, you know, app or activity for that. And so oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, that might be broader early on, sort of more a visioning or brainstorming type activity, whereas we dive deeper, or not dive deeper, move forward in the process and, you know, we narrow the alternatives and present some alternatives to get feedback on, and then come up with a preferred alternative or something like that, the feedback mechanisms and apps will look different. And so I think it really depends on, what the needs are at that point in the process to kind of identify what the right way to and tools are to engage the public. It sounds to me like that might be it for questions. I'm going to turn over to Barbara to wrap.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, I hope you learned some new things and have new ideas for how to apply them. One thing I did want to underscore is that while Maureen and Lisa are speaking about the Citizens Initiative Review, that, as they mentioned, that's based upon the citizen jury model. So this is a process that you could adapt to use on a particular issue where it's not really directed to the voters, but it more could be a statement that would go to a city council or the commissioners. Yeah, and I think in doing that, to answer the question that Lisa already addressed, you could find that it's not quite as labor intensive as it would be if it actually was in the political arena. At least I hope so. I tried to pitch it to one of my clients for a housing strategy, and I was not successful, but I will find a time when I am. We'd really like to hear from you on what you'd like to see, what kind of topics you'd like to see us address this year. It might be through experiential things or through training or through webinars. We'll figure all that out, but are there any ideas you have for how IAP2 can help you stay in touch with best practices and do your job better and make your job easier for you? So please either chat those or feel free to email them to any one of us, and we look forward to connecting with you next time. Anything else? Okay, thank you all. Bye-bye.